My fiancé treated my family like dirt and said that they should sit in the back of our wedding because they are nobody. I showed her what that really meant. My parents are the best people I know. Dad worked construction for 30 years, and Mom was a school nurse, both retired now. They paid for my college by taking extra shifts, never missed a single game when I played football, and when I started my landscaping business, they were my first investors with their retirement savings. They never asked for anything back except for me to be happy. So when I met Rachel at my friend's wedding and we hit it off, my parents were thrilled. Rachel worked in pharmaceutical sales, made good money, and seemed perfect at first. She was charming when I introduced her to my parents, complimenting Mom's cooking and laughing at Dad's stories. They loved her immediately and started treating her like a daughter. Mom would send her home with containers of food, and Dad would fix things on her car without being asked. For 2 years, everything seemed great. Then I proposed, and something switched in Rachel like someone flipped a light off. The first sign was at our engagement dinner. My parents had saved up to take us to this nice steakhouse to celebrate. Rachel spent the whole meal on her phone, giving one-word answers when my parents tried to talk to her. When Mom asked about wedding planning, Rachel said she'd handle it herself since my parents probably didn't know about proper weddings anyway. Dad just quietly finished his steak. After that, Rachel stopped coming to Sunday dinners at my parents' house. Said she was too busy, but I'd see her posting brunch photos with her friends. When Mom offered to help with wedding centerpieces to save money, Rachel told her they weren't doing homemade crafts for the wedding because this wasn't a backyard party. Mom had made centerpieces for 50 family weddings and they were beautiful. Rachel never even looked at them. It got worse when we started guest lists. Rachel wanted to invite 8 people from my side. Just 8. Her side had 120. When I said my parents had a lot of friends and family, Rachel said we weren't running a charity event for every random person my parents knew. She actually called my aunts and uncles random people. Then came the venue drama. Rachel picked this country club that cost $40,000 just for the space. My parents offered to contribute $10,000, which was huge for them. Rachel laughed and said that wouldn't even cover flowers, so they should just save their money. But she still expected them to pay for the rehearsal dinner, which would be another $15,000 at the place she picked. The breaking point was when Mom called to ask what color dress she should wear. Rachel told her it didn't matter because nobody would be looking at her anyway, then added that my parents should just sit in the back and not embarrass her by trying to talk to her family or friends. When Mom told me this, she was crying. I confronted Rachel and that's when she said it. She wasn't marrying my family, she was marrying me. My parents were just people I happened to be related to, and after the wedding, we'd probably only see them on holidays anyway. She said successful couples create boundaries and my parents needed to learn theirs. That's when I started making changes. First, I told my parents not to put any money toward the wedding. Nothing. Not a single dollar. They were confused, but I insisted. Rachel was furious, said it was tradition for the groom's family to pay for the rehearsal dinner. I reminded her she wasn't marrying my family, so why would they pay? Next, I said my parents wouldn't be involved in any wedding planning. No opinions, no help, no attendance at meetings with vendors. Rachel had to handle everything with just her family. She started stressing immediately because her parents lived across the country and weren't hands-on people. Then I started pulling back family support in other ways. When Rachel's car broke down, she called asking if my dad could look at it. I said no, she wasn't marrying him, so she should call a mechanic. Cost her $1,200. When she wanted help moving some furniture from her apartment, I told her to hire movers since my cousins she didn't want at the wedding weren't available. When tax season came and she wanted my uncle who was an accountant to do her taxes like he had the past 2 years, I said he was too busy with family stuff. She had to pay someone $500. The wedding planning became a nightmare for her. Her maid of honor dropped out because Rachel was so demanding. Her parents refused to fly in for a menu tasting. Every vendor meeting she was alone while her friends posted about their fiancés' families helping them. She started complaining I wasn't supportive. I reminded her she was marrying me, not my family, and I was there, wasn't I? 2 weeks before the wedding, everything collapsed. Rachel's phone call came 3 days before the wedding. Her voice shook in a way I'd never heard before, almost like she was choking on the words. The wedding planner quit that morning after Rachel screamed at her about centerpiece placement for 20 minutes straight. The country club was threatening to cancel everything because Rachel had been so difficult that their entire staff was refusing to work the event. She was completely falling apart, crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. She begged me to fix it, to call the wedding planner back, to talk to the country club manager, to make this all go away. I sat there on my couch listening to her sob and felt absolutely nothing. I told Rachel I couldn't help her because she made it clear she wasn't marrying my family, so this was her wedding to handle. She started crying even harder and said she didn't mean those things the way they sounded, that she was just stressed about making everything perfect. I reminded her about the comment to my mom about sitting in the back and not embarrassing her. I asked her to explain how else that could have been meant. The line went completely silent except for her breathing. After about 30 seconds, she hung up without saying another word. Rachel showed up at my parents' house around 7 that night without calling first. I was there having dinner with them when the doorbell rang. Mom answered the door, and I heard Rachel's voice from the dining room, high and shaky, trying to apologize. I walked to the front door and saw Rachel standing there with makeup running down her face, wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. She looked at Mom and started saying she was sorry, that wedding planning had been so stressful and she had such high standards for how things should be. It came out as more excuses than an actual apology. Dad walked into the hallway, took one look at the situation, and quietly asked Rachel to leave. He said she'd already said enough over the past 6 months. Rachel looked at me like I was supposed to defend her or invite her in. I just stood there. She turned around and walked back to her car. My phone started blowing up the next morning with texts from Rachel's friends and co-workers. 23 messages by noon, all saying basically the same thing. I was being unreasonable. Every bride gets stressed before her wedding. I needed to be more supportive. Rachel was going through a hard time and I was making it worse. They acted like I was the problem, like I was some terrible guy who couldn't handle a little wedding drama. I deleted most of the messages without responding. But I did respond to one person, Viviana, who had been Rachel's maid of honor before she dropped out. I sent her a long text explaining what Rachel actually said and did to my family over the past 6 months. The comment about my parents sitting in the back, calling my aunts and uncles random people, laughing when my parents offered to contribute money, refusing to let Mom help with anything because our family wasn't sophisticated enough. I laid it all out in detail. Viviana called me an hour later. She apologized for not knowing the full story and for sending that text. She told me she quit as maid of honor because Rachel had been treating her terribly too. Rachel constantly criticized her weight, made comments about her income level, and compared her unfavorably to other friends who had more money or better jobs. Viviana said she should have seen the red flags about how Rachel views people she considers beneath her. She felt stupid for not connecting the dots sooner. We talked for almost 30 minutes and she said several other friends had started to notice Rachel's behavior too, but nobody wanted to say anything because Rachel could be vindictive when people challenged her. The day before the wedding, Rachel's parents finally flew in from across the country. Her dad called me around 10 in the morning and asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no, but something in his voice made me agree. We met at a diner near the highway. He looked tired, older than I remembered from the engagement dinner. I explained everything that had happened, not holding anything back. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his coffee getting cold in front of him. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute. Then he admitted that Rachel has always had issues with looking down on people who didn't meet her standards of success. He said it started in high school when she got into an expensive private college and some of her friends didn't. He thought marriage might mature her, that having a partner would teach her what really mattered. But he realized now that wasn't fair to expect, wasn't fair to put that burden on me. He told me he didn't blame me for calling things off. He said he was actually relieved I figured out who Rachel really is before the wedding instead of after, before there were kids involved or years of marriage wasted. His voice cracked a little when he said that. He mentioned that Rachel's mother was furious with me, calling me all kinds of names, but he was going to have a serious talk with his daughter about her values and attitude. He said someone needed to, and clearly they hadn't done it when she was younger. We shook hands in the parking lot, and he paid for both our coffees even though I tried to grab the check. He looked at me and said he hoped I found someone who appreciated what I had to offer. Then he drove away toward Rachel's apartment. That same night, Rachel sent me a long email. The subject line just said, "Please read this." It started as an apology, saying she understood why I was upset and that she handled things badly. But 3 paragraphs in, it turned into blaming me for not supporting her dreams of an elegant wedding. She wrote that my family was nice but unsophisticated, and she was trying to protect me from embarrassment by limiting their involvement. She said people at her level of professional success expected certain things at weddings, and my family didn't understand that world. She actually used the phrase "at her level," like she was talking about a video game. The email went on for pages, getting more defensive with each paragraph, explaining how hard she worked to plan everything perfectly and how I undermined her at every turn. I read the whole thing once, then closed my laptop. There was nothing left to say to her. The wedding day arrived and I woke up in my old bedroom at my parents' house. I'd spent the night there because I didn't want to be alone in my apartment. Dad was already outside working on the back fence when I came downstairs around 8. I grabbed a hammer and joined him without saying anything. We worked in comfortable silence for most of the morning, pulling out old boards and measuring new ones. The physical work felt good, kept my hands busy and my mind focused on something simple. Around noon, Mom brought out sandwiches and lemonade on a tray. She set it down on the patio table and called us over. We ate lunch together in the backyard, talking about Dad's plans for the garden and whether they should repaint the garage this summer. Nobody mentioned that I was supposed to be getting married today. Nobody asked how I was feeling or if I was okay. They just let me be there with them, doing normal family things, and I was grateful for their quiet support. Rhett called that afternoon while I was cleaning up tools in the garage. He asked how I was doing, then told me the country club wedding got canceled completely, He'd heard from a friend who worked there that Rachel had a complete meltdown when the venue manager wouldn't accommodate last-minute changes she demanded. She wanted to move the ceremony inside because she decided she didn't like the outdoor setup anymore, even though that would have required moving 200 chairs and completely rearranging the space. When they said no, she started screaming at the manager and threatened to sue them. They refunded her entire deposit just to get rid of her. Rhett said the staff was actually celebrating that they didn't have to work her wedding. He asked if I wanted to come over for dinner with him and Savannah. I said yes and told my parents I'd be back later. Mom hugged me at the door and told me to have fun with my friends. At Rhett's house, Savannah opened the door before I even knocked. She pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than expected. Her arms felt warm and solid, like she was trying to hold me together through touch alone. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet, but her smile was genuine. She led me inside where the smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. Rhett stood at the stove stirring something in a large pot. He waved me over with the wooden spoon and pointed at the kitchen table where 3 place settings waited. Savannah brought over a basket of bread and sat down across from me. She tore off a piece and buttered it slowly, like she was working up to saying something. Finally, she spoke up and told me she never liked how Rachel talked about service workers and retail employees. The words came out in a rush, like she had been holding them in for months. She said she noticed it at restaurants where Rachel would snap her fingers at servers or complain loudly about how long things took. At first, Savannah thought maybe Rachel was just awkward in social situations or stressed about work. But then she started paying closer attention to how Rachel treated the hostess, the busboy, the valet driver. Rachel would look right through them like they were furniture. Savannah said she felt sick now thinking about all the times she made excuses for that behavior. She realized it was Rachel's actual personality showing through, not nervousness or bad days. It was who she really was when she thought nobody important was watching. Rhett brought the pot to the table and served pasta with meat sauce onto our plates. He sat down heavily and stared at his food for a moment. Then he looked up at me and said he felt guilty for introducing us in the first place. His voice was rough, like the words hurt coming out. He said he should have seen Rachel's true character sooner, should have noticed the warning signs before I got so invested. I shook my head and told him it was not his fault. Rachel was good at hiding her attitudes at first, good at being charming when it mattered. I was the one who ignored warning signs because I wanted the relationship to work so badly. I saw my parents' disappointment in those early months when Rachel stopped coming to Sunday dinners. I heard the edge in her voice when she talked about my family's jobs and lifestyle. But I made excuses, told myself she was just nervous about fitting in or stressed about wedding planning. Rhett nodded slowly and said, "Sometimes you have to see someone under stress to know who they really are." He said his dad always told him that you learn more about a person in one crisis than in 100 normal days. Rachel failed that test completely. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, just the sound of forks on plates and the occasional sip of water. The food was good, simple, and filling. Savannah asked if I wanted seconds, and I accepted gratefully. The following week, I threw myself into my landscaping business with an intensity I had not felt in months. Monday morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise and started going through client files. Justin was already there, which surprised me since he usually showed up closer to 8. He looked up from his computer and asked if I was okay. I told him I needed to stay busy, needed to focus on something I could control. We spent the morning planning out jobs for the week and calling clients to confirm schedules. Around 10, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I answered, and a woman's voice asked if I was the owner of the landscaping company. She said her friend had recommended us, and she wanted to schedule a consultation for her backyard. We talked for 15 minutes about what she wanted, when she needed it done, and what her budget looked like. After I hung up, Justin looked at me with a strange expression. He said he overheard part of the conversation and wanted to tell me something. He said he never understood what I saw in someone who did not respect what we built. His words hit me harder than expected. Justin explained that he had run into Rachel at the gas station a few weeks ago and tried to make conversation. He asked how wedding planning was going, and Rachel said it was fine but stressful because I was just a landscaper and did not understand the kind of event she was trying to create. She said it like our business was something to be embarrassed about, like the company we built from nothing was not good enough for her friends to know about. Justin said he almost called me that day, but figured I already knew how she felt. He was right. I did know, somewhere deep down. I just had not wanted to admit it to myself. Thursday afternoon, Mom called while I was measuring out mulch for a flower bed installation. Her voice sounded careful, like she was testing the waters. She said she was planning Sunday dinner and wanted to know if I would come. Several relatives wanted to stop by to check on me, she added quickly. I almost said no immediately. The last thing I wanted was a pity party where everyone tiptoed around me and asked how I was holding up. But then Mom said she would make extra meatballs, the ones with the cheese inside that I always loved as a kid. Something about that detail, that small gesture of knowing what I needed, made my throat tight. I told her I would be there and that I was actually hungry for the first time in weeks. She made a happy sound and said she would see me Sunday at 2. After we hung up, I stood there holding my phone, feeling lighter than I had in days. Justin walked over and asked if everything was okay. I told him I was going to Sunday dinner and he grinned. He said good, because family was what mattered when everything else fell apart. Sunday arrived bright and warm. I drove to my parents' house with the windows down, letting the spring air blow through the truck. Cars already lined the street when I pulled up. I recognized my aunt's van, my uncle's sedan, my cousin's truck. The front door was unlocked, so I walked right in. The house exploded with noise and movement. My aunts descended on me with hugs that squeezed the air from my lungs. My uncles clapped me on the shoulder and made jokes about having more room at the table now. Little cousins ran past, chasing each other through the living room. The dining room table was stretched to its full length with the extra leaf inserted, covered in a plastic tablecloth decorated with sunflowers. Plates and glasses crowded every available surface. Mom emerged from the kitchen carrying a huge bowl of meatballs in red sauce. She set it down carefully and came over to kiss my cheek. Dad appeared with a platter of chicken cutlets and told everyone to sit down before the food got cold. We squeezed around the table, chairs touching, elbows bumping. Bowls and platters passed from hand to hand. Garlic bread disappeared within minutes. Someone told a story about Uncle Mike getting locked out of his car at the grocery store. Someone else brought up the time Aunt Teresa accidentally dyed her hair green instead of blonde. Laughter rolled around the table in waves. Nobody asked about Rachel. Nobody mentioned the canceled wedding or how I was feeling. They just included me in the chaos like always, like nothing had changed. I realized this was exactly what I needed. These people had known me since I was born. They had watched me play football in high school, helped move furniture when I got my first apartment, celebrated when I started my business. They knew me, really knew me, and they were here just to be together. I grabbed another meatball and listened to Dad tell an old construction story I had heard a dozen times before. Monday morning, my phone rang while I was reviewing invoices at the office. The caller ID showed a local number I did not recognize. I answered, and a man's voice introduced himself as Colin Boyd, the manager at the country club. My stomach dropped. He said he wanted to apologize for how everything went down with the wedding. His voice was sincere, tired even. He said he had been in the wedding business for a long time and dealt with plenty of difficult brides, but Rachel was on another level entirely. He wanted me to know that his entire staff felt terrible about the situation. They could see I was a decent guy caught in an impossible position. I thanked him for calling and told him honestly that I dodged a bullet. He laughed, a short bark of sound, and said that was the truth. Then his voice got more serious. He said Rachel had tried to sue the country club after the cancellation. She claimed they breached their contract and caused her emotional distress. But her own behavior was so well documented by his staff that her lawyer took one look at the evidence and advised her to drop it immediately. Colum said he had statements from 6 different employees about Rachel screaming at servers, throwing silverware when table settings were not perfect, and threatening to get people fired over minor issues. He said in 15 years of running wedding venues, he could always tell which marriages would last based on how couples treated his employees during planning. The ones who were kind and respectful to everyone, from the janitor to the head chef, those marriages had a chance. The ones who treated staff like servants or obstacles, those marriages were doomed from the start. Rachel failed that test so badly that his staff actually celebrated when the wedding got canceled. They had been dreading working her event for weeks. I did not know what to say to that. Colum told me to take care of myself and hung up. 2 weeks later, I was at the grocery store loading bags into my truck when someone called my name. I turned and saw Viviana walking across the parking lot toward me. She looked different from I remembered, lighter somehow. Her hair was shorter and she wore jeans and a t-shirt instead of the designer clothes Rachel always insisted their friend group wear. She asked if we could talk for a minute. We ended up standing between our cars for 20 minutes while she told me everything. Rachel had been posting constantly on social media about being betrayed and abandoned. She was playing the victim to anyone who would listen, claiming I called off the wedding out of nowhere over nothing. But her stories kept changing. First she said I got cold feet. Then she said my family pressured me to leave her. Then she said we had a huge fight about money. Viviana said most of their mutual friends were starting to see through it because the inconsistencies were too obvious. People were asking questions Rachel could not answer. Why would I suddenly change my mind? What actually happened? When pressed for details, Rachel would get defensive and change the subject. Viviana said she felt terrible for not speaking up sooner about Rachel's behavior. She admitted she had been worried about losing their friendship, about being cut out of the social circle they had built. But now she realized Rachel only kept friends around who made her feel better about herself or could do things for her. Viviana had a nice car that Rachel liked to borrow. She had connections at restaurants that got them good tables. She was useful, so Rachel kept her close. But the moment Viviana quit as maid of honor because Rachel was treating her so badly, Rachel turned on her completely. Started spreading rumors, excluding her from group events, talking behind her back. Viviana said she was actually relieved to be out of that toxic situation. She asked if I was doing okay, and I told her honestly that I was better than I had been in months. Over the next month, my business saw a surge of new clients that seemed to come out of nowhere. Monday, a woman called asking about lawn maintenance for her rental properties. Wednesday, a man scheduled a consultation for landscaping his entire front yard. Friday, a property management company reached out about a contract for multiple locations. I was on the phone with the property manager when I realized what was happening. She mentioned that her neighbor knew my parents and had recommended our company. Another client said his wife went to the school with my mom. A third said he used to work construction with my dad years ago. Word had gotten around town about what happened with Rachel. People who knew my family were deliberately choosing my company to show their support. I told Dad about it that weekend while we were working on his garage door. He nodded like this did not surprise him at all. He said that was what happened when you built a good reputation in a community over decades. People remembered how you treated them, how you showed up when they needed help, how you conducted yourself when things got hard. He said my family had been part of this town for generations, working honest jobs and helping neighbors. That meant something to people. It meant they trusted us to do right by them. Rachel never understood that because she was always chasing the next impressive thing instead of building something real. I realized he was right. My parents had spent 30 years earning respect through their actions. Rachel thought respect came from expensive venues and exclusive guest lists. She was wrong. Rachel's mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail because I was on a job site and honestly didn't want to deal with whatever she had to say. When I listened to the message later, her voice was sharp and angry in a way that reminded me exactly of her daughter. She said I was immature and selfish for ruining Rachel's life over minor wedding disagreements. Minor disagreements. That's what she called telling my mom to sit in the back of the church and not embarrass Rachel by talking to her fancy friends. She said Rachel had been planning her dream wedding since she was a little girl, and I destroyed everything because I couldn't handle a little stress. She said I should be ashamed of myself for abandoning her daughter 2 weeks before the ceremony. The voicemail was 3 minutes long and got progressively more heated as it went on. I saved it and drove straight to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen making dinner when I arrived. I played the voicemail on speakerphone without any introduction. Mom's face went pale as Rachel's mother's voice filled the room. Dad set down the knife he was using to chop vegetables and listened with his jaw tight. When it ended, nobody said anything for a long moment. Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel and sat down at the kitchen table. She looked tired in a way that made my chest hurt. Dad put his hand on her shoulder and she reached up to squeeze it. Then Mom looked at me and said, "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." She wasn't angry when she said it, just sad and resigned like she'd finally understood something she'd been trying not to see. Dad nodded and went back to making dinner. We didn't talk about Rachel or her mother for the rest of the evening. We just ate the meal Dad cooked and talked about normal things like the weather and what was happening with the neighbors. But I could tell my parents were relieved that I'd called off the wedding, even if they'd never say it out loud. That night, my phone buzzed at 2 a.m. with a text from Rachel. I'd been half asleep, but the notification woke me up completely. The text was long and rambling, saying she'd been thinking about everything and maybe we were moving too fast. She said she was willing to postpone the wedding if I'd reconsider breaking up. We could go to couples counseling and work through our issues. She used the word issues like what happened was just a communication problem we could solve with a therapist. I read the text 3 times trying to understand if she actually got it or if this was just another manipulation. The answer was clear in her words. She talked about postponing the wedding timeline and going to counseling sessions. She never once mentioned my family or acknowledged what she'd said to my mom. She never apologized for calling my aunts and uncles random people or laughing at my parents' offer to help pay for the venue. She thought the problem was that we needed better communication skills or more time to plan. She didn't understand that the problem was her fundamental disrespect for people she considered beneath her. That included my family, service workers, anyone who didn't meet her standards of success and sophistication. I typed out a response telling her exactly that, then deleted it. There was no point. She wasn't going to suddenly develop empathy or realize that treating people badly was wrong. I blocked her number instead. Then I blocked her on every social media platform I could think of. I should have done it weeks ago, but some part of me had been holding on to hope that she'd realize what she'd done and genuinely apologize. That text at 2 a.m. killed that hope completely. I fell back asleep easier than I had in months. The next afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Thomas, Rhett's dad. He asked if I was free for lunch and said he wanted to talk to me about something. I'd only met Thomas a handful of times at Rhett's house for holidays and barbecues. He was always friendly, but we'd never had a one-on-one conversation. I agreed to meet him at a burger place near my office, curious about what he wanted. Thomas was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth by the window. He stood up and shook my hand with a firm grip, then we both ordered burgers and fries from the waitress. He asked how I was doing, and I gave him the standard answer that I was fine. He nodded like he knew I was lying but wasn't going to push it. Then he started telling me about his own broken engagement 30 years ago. He'd been 25 and engaged to a woman named Caroline who came from money. Caroline's family looked down on Thomas's parents because his dad was a plumber and his mom cleaned houses. Caroline never said anything directly, but she started making excuses for why Thomas shouldn't bring his parents to events with her family. She said they wouldn't be comfortable around her parents' country club friends. She suggested they have a small wedding with just immediate family to save money, but really she just didn't want Thomas's extended family there. Thomas said he ignored the warning signs because Caroline was beautiful and sophisticated, and he thought he was lucky to be with her. Then one day his mom had a health scare and ended up in the hospital. Caroline complained that Thomas was spending too much time at the hospital instead of focusing on wedding planning. She said his mom would be fine and he was being dramatic. That's when Thomas realized he was about to marry someone who didn't value the people he loved most. He called off the wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony. Caroline's family threatened to sue him for the deposits they'd paid. His own friends said he was crazy for letting her go. But 6 months later, he met Rhett's mom at a community volunteer event and knew immediately she was different. She asked about his family with genuine interest. She wanted to meet his parents right away. When his mom's health issues came back, Rhett's mom was at the hospital every day bringing food and keeping everyone company. Thomas said marrying her was the best decision he ever made. He looked at me across the table and said he was proud of me for choosing family. He said a lot of men his age regretted not standing up for their parents when they were young. They let their wives or girlfriends push their families aside, and by the time they realized what they'd lost, it was too late to fix it. I felt something loosen in my chest that I didn't know had been tight. Thomas changed the subject and started asking about my landscaping business. He owned a successful commercial real estate company and wanted to know about my expansion plans. I told him Justin and I had been talking about taking on bigger commercial contracts, but we didn't have the connections yet. Thomas pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. He said he knew several property managers and business owners who were always looking for reliable landscaping companies. He gave me 3 names right there and said he'd send introduction emails that afternoon. Then we spent the next 2 hours talking about business strategy and growth plans. Thomas had started his company from nothing and built it into something substantial over 30 years. He gave me advice about managing employees, dealing with difficult clients, and knowing when to turn down jobs that weren't worth the headache. He said real success meant staying true to your values while building something meaningful. Money was important, but it wasn't worth compromising who you were or hurting the people who supported you. By the time we finished lunch, I had pages of notes on my phone and felt more energized about the future than I had in months. Thomas paid the check and told me to call him anytime I needed advice or wanted to talk through a business decision. He said Rhett had told him I was good people, and he could see why his son valued our friendship. We shook hands in the parking lot, and I drove back to the office feeling like maybe everything was going to work out after all. A month passed and I started to feel normal again. The wedding that didn't happen felt like something that occurred to a different person in a different life. I took my parents out to dinner at the same steakhouse where we'd had the engagement dinner with Rachel. This time was completely different. Mom wore a blue dress she'd been saving for a special occasion, and Dad put on the nice shirt Mom had bought him for Christmas. We got a table by the window and ordered appetizers and steaks without worrying about the cost. Mom and Dad were relaxed in a way they hadn't been during that first dinner. They laughed and told old stories about when I was a kid. Dad talked about teaching me to ride a bike and how I'd crashed into the mailbox on my first solo attempt. Mom remembered the time I'd tried to cook her breakfast in bed for Mother's Day and nearly set the kitchen on fire. We laughed until our sides hurt, and other diners looked over at us smiling. When dessert came, Dad reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder. He said he was proud of how I'd handled everything with Rachel. He said it took strength to walk away from someone you cared about when you realized they weren't good for you or your family. Mom squeezed my hand and said she'd been worried about me marrying Rachel, but hadn't known how to say anything. She said parents never want to interfere in their kids' relationships, but sometimes you see things that make you concerned. She'd noticed how Rachel talked to service workers and how she always found excuses not to come to family events. But Mom had hoped Rachel would change, or that she'd been wrong about her concerns. Now she was just relieved I'd figured it out before it was too late. We finished dinner and drove home separately. I sat in my truck in my parents' driveway for a few minutes, watching the lights in their house and feeling grateful for people who loved me without conditions or judgment. The next week, I got a call from a woman who introduced herself as the caterer for the rehearsal dinner that never happened. She apologized for bothering me, but said she'd been trying to reach Rachel for weeks about the deposit that was never paid. Rachel had apparently promised to send payment multiple times, but the checks never arrived. Now Rachel wasn't returning phone calls or emails, and the caterer was out $3,000 for the deposit plus the prep work she'd done. She asked if I could help her get in contact with Rachel, or if I knew anything about the payment situation. I told her honestly that I wasn't responsible for Rachel's debts and had no obligation to help her collect money. The wedding was canceled, and whatever arrangements Rachel had made were between her and the vendors. The caterer sounded disappointed but not surprised. She said Rachel had been difficult to work with from the start, changing menu selections constantly and demanding custom options that cost extra, but then refusing to pay the upcharges. She'd dealt with demanding brides before, but Rachel had been exceptionally bad. I suggested she pursue the debt through small claims court if Rachel continued to ignore her. The caterer thanked me and said she'd learned an expensive lesson about requiring full payment up front. After we hung up, I wondered how many other vendors Rachel had stiffed. The florist, the photographer, the wedding planner who quit. Rachel had probably left a trail of unpaid bills and angry business owners in her wake. 2 days later, Justin called me while I was finishing up a residential job. He sounded excited in a way that made me stop what I was doing and pay attention. He said we'd landed a major contract with a property management company that managed 15 commercial properties around town. The contract would keep us busy for the next year at minimum and could lead to even more work if we did well. I asked how we'd gotten on their radar, and Justin said the property manager had specifically mentioned our family's reputation for honest work and fair dealing. Someone had recommended us based on knowing my parents and their years of community involvement. Justin laughed and said Rachel would have hated getting her hands dirty at the company events we'd have to attend as part of building the business relationship. He was right. Rachel had always acted like my landscaping business was something slightly embarrassing, something she tolerated but didn't respect. She'd never understood that building a successful business meant hard work and getting dirty sometimes. She'd wanted me to hire people to do all the actual landscaping while I just managed from an office. But I liked the physical work and the satisfaction of transforming an ugly yard into something beautiful. Justin and I celebrated by getting beers after work and talking about hiring plans. We'd need at least 2 more full-time employees to handle the increased workload. Justin said his girlfriend had a cousin who was looking for work and had landscaping experience. We agreed to interview him the following week. Sitting at the bar with Justin, talking about expanding our business and building something real, I felt more successful than I ever had when I was planning that expensive country club wedding. I started dating again without really planning to. A friend invited me to a community fundraiser, and I met a teacher named Amy, who made me laugh within 5 minutes of talking to her. We exchanged numbers and went for coffee the following weekend. It wasn't serious, just casual conversation and getting to know someone new. Amy asked about my work, and seemed genuinely interested when I talked about the landscaping business. She told me about her students and the challenges of teaching middle school. When I mentioned my parents, her face lit up and she asked questions about them. She said family was important to her too, and she'd love to meet them someday if we kept seeing each other. That simple statement, that easy acknowledgement that meeting parents were a normal part of dating, felt refreshing after Rachel's attitude. I went on a few more casual dates with women I met through friends or at community events. Nothing serious developed, but it felt good to talk to people who were interested in my life without judgment. One woman owned a small bakery, and we talked for 2 hours about the challenges of running a business. Another worked as a nurse and reminded me of my mom with her compassion and practical attitude. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but I was open to possibilities in a way I hadn't been in years. 3 months after the breakup, I ran into Rachel at an Italian restaurant downtown. I was there with Justin and some friends celebrating landing another commercial contract. Rachel was at a corner table with some guy in an expensive suit and designer watch. I noticed her first and my stomach did a small flip before I realized I was fine. She looked up and saw me and her face went pale. She quickly turned back to her date and said something that made him look over at me. I gave a small nod and turned back to my own table. My friends asked if I was okay and I said honestly that I was. We finished our meal and I didn't look at Rachel's table again. When we left the restaurant, I realized I didn't feel anything. No anger about what she'd said to my family. No regret about the relationship ending. No jealousy of the guy in the expensive suit who was probably getting the same treatment I got once Rachel decided he was locked in. Just relief that I wasn't the one sitting across from her pretending her behavior was acceptable. Just gratitude that I'd figured out who she really was before we got married. The following Sunday, Mom told me something that surprised me during dinner. She said some of Rachel's family friends had reached out to apologize for how things went down. People who had been at events with Rachel's family and witnessed some of the drama. Apparently, Rachel's dad had followed through on his promise to have a serious talk with Rachel about her values and attitude. Rachel hadn't taken it well according to what these friends told Mom. She'd accused her dad of taking my side and not supporting her during a difficult time. But Rachel's dad had stood firm and told her that treating people badly because she considered them beneath her was wrong. He'd told her that she'd lost a good man because she couldn't see past her own ego and status obsession. The family friends wanted my parents to know that not everyone in Rachel's circle agreed with how she'd handled things. Mom said she appreciated the gesture, even though it didn't change what happened. She said it was nice to know that some people recognized the problem, even if Rachel herself never would. Dad said he hoped Rachel learned something from the experience, but he doubted it. People like that rarely changed unless they hit rock bottom and were forced to examine themselves. We finished dinner and played cards like we did most Sundays. My phone sat silent in my pocket. No late-night texts from Rachel, no voicemails from her mother. Just peace and the sound of my family laughing over a card game. The holidays arrived and my parents' house filled up like it always did. Aunts and uncles crowded the kitchen while cousins took over the living room. Kids ran through the hallway screaming about something. The dining table got extended with 2 extra leaves and covered with mismatched chairs borrowed from neighbors. This was exactly what Rachel had wanted to cut down to 8 people. These supposedly random nobodies who weren't worth inviting to her fancy country club wedding. Uncle Mike dealt cards at one table, while my dad's brothers argued about the football game on TV. Mom and her sisters laughed in the kitchen over something that happened 30 years ago. The noise level made normal conversation impossible. You had to shout to be heard over 3 different conversations happening at once. I sat at the card table with Justin and a couple cousins, playing the same game we'd played since we were kids. Someone made a joke about my terrible poker face and everyone laughed. The house smelled like Mom's cooking and too many people in one space. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. No amount of elegant centerpieces or expensive venues could ever replace this. These people showed up for each other without being asked. They helped move furniture and fixed cars and did taxes and brought casseroles when someone was sick. Rachel had called them random people, but they were the opposite of random. They were family. Justin cleared his throat during dessert, and everyone got quiet, which almost never happened in this house. He stood up with his girlfriend Sarah next to him, both of them grinning. He announced they were getting married next summer, and the whole room erupted. Aunts rushed over to hug Sarah while uncles clapped Justin on the back. Mom started crying happy tears immediately. Sarah worked as a nurse with kids who had serious illnesses, the kind of job that took real heart. She'd been to probably 20 family dinners over the past 4 years and knew everyone's names. When the excitement died down a little, she thanked everyone for welcoming her into the family. Her voice shook like she was actually emotional about it. Watching them together, I saw something I'd missed with Rachel. Sarah looked at Justin's family the same way she looked at him, with genuine affection and respect. When Mom hugged her, Sarah hugged back hard. When Dad made a joke, Sarah laughed for real instead of giving a polite smile. This was what a real partnership looked like. 2 people who valued the same things and appreciated each other's families instead of tolerating them. A week later, Sarah called and asked if I wanted to help with wedding planning since I'd been through the process. I said yes immediately, curious to see how different it would be. We met at a coffee shop and she pulled out a notebook filled with ideas and questions. She asked about vendors I'd researched and what worked well versus what didn't. When I mentioned Mom's centerpieces, Sarah's face lit up. She asked if Mom would be willing to make some for their wedding because she loved the idea of something handmade and personal. I called Mom right there and Sarah got on the phone to ask herself. Mom agreed, and Sarah actually got teary thanking her. She said her own mom had passed away when she was young, and having Justin's mom involved in the wedding meant everything to her. The contrast with Rachel's rejection hit me hard. Rachel had looked at Mom's offer like it was an insult. Sarah treated it like a gift. Over the next few weeks, I helped Sarah and Justin pick a venue, a nice local place that cost a fraction of Rachel's country club. Sarah wanted everyone included, asked for input from family members, and got genuinely excited about traditions like the anniversary dance. She made planning fun instead of stressful. Justin looked relaxed and happy instead of walking on eggshells. This was how it was supposed to work. My landscaping business had the best year since I started it. The commercial contracts kept coming, and Justin and I hired 2 more guys to handle the workload. In December, I sat down with my accountant uncle and looked at the numbers. We'd made enough profit that I could finally pay back my parents' investment with interest. I wrote them a check for $12,000, covering their original $10,000 plus 20%. On Christmas morning, I handed it to Dad while Mom watched. He looked at the amount and immediately tried to hand it back. He said the business money was a gift, not a loan, and they didn't want repayment. I pushed his hand away and told him their support made everything possible, so they were getting their share of the success. Mom took the check and stared at it for a long moment. Then she said she was going to frame it instead of cashing it, because seeing the number meant more than having the money. Dad shook his head, but he was smiling. I told them to cash it and use it for something fun, maybe a trip they'd always wanted to take. Mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. She whispered that they were proud of me, not because of the money, but because I'd stayed true to who I was. That meant more than the check ever could. After the holidays, I packed a bag and drove to the mountains for a long weekend alone. I needed space to think without family or work or anything else demanding attention. The cabin I rented sat next to a lake that reflected the mountains perfectly when the wind died down. I spent 3 days hiking, reading, and sitting by the water. On the last evening, I watched the sunset turn the lake orange and pink. The quiet felt good after weeks of noise and people. I thought about everything that happened with Rachel, how close I'd come to marrying someone who didn't respect what mattered most to me. The broken engagement had felt like failure at first, but sitting there by the lake, I saw it differently. It was a blessing that showed me my boundaries before I made a permanent mistake. Family wasn't negotiable. Respect wasn't optional. Basic human decency mattered more than any wedding venue or social status. Rachel had wanted me to choose between her and my family, and I'd chosen family without hesitation. That clarity felt powerful. I knew exactly what I wanted now and what I wouldn't compromise on. The next person I got serious with would have to value the same things I did, or there was no point. When I got back to town, Savannah called within an hour like she'd been waiting. She said she had a friend I should meet, another pharmaceutical sales rep who volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends. My first reaction was skepticism about the same career as Rachel. Savannah laughed and promised this woman was nothing like Rachel, came from a big family similar to mine and actually cared about people. She suggested a group dinner so it wouldn't feel like pressure. I agreed mainly because I trusted Savannah's judgment. She'd seen through Rachel eventually and wouldn't set me up with someone similar. The dinner was at a casual Italian place with Savannah, Rhett, and Savannah's friend. Her name was Bella North and she showed up in jeans and a sweater, no designer labels or expensive jewelry. She asked genuine questions about my landscaping business instead of making polite small talk. When I mentioned expanding to commercial properties, she wanted to know details about the work and challenges. She told stories about her own family gatherings that sounded exactly like mine, loud and chaotic with too many people in too small a space. When she talked about her pharmaceutical job, she focused on helping patients access medications they couldn't afford, rather than sales numbers and commissions. By the end of dinner, I'd laughed more than I had in months. I asked for her number before we left the restaurant. Bella and I started seeing each other regularly but kept things slow. Coffee dates turned into dinners, turned into weekend hikes. We talked about everything from childhood memories to future goals. She didn't play games or create drama. If she said she'd call, she called. If she made plans, she kept them. After a month, I invited her to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. She brought flowers for Mom and asked Dad about his construction career with real interest, not polite questions. She helped clear dishes without being asked and laughed at my uncle's terrible jokes. After she left, Mom hugged me in the kitchen and whispered that she liked this one. Dad nodded his agreement. I realized I liked her too, in a way that felt solid and real instead of exciting but uncertain. Bella fit into my life naturally, instead of requiring me to reshape everything around her. 4 months into dating, I told Bella the full Rachel story over dinner at her apartment. I explained the engagement, the insults to my family, the strategic withdrawal of support, and the canceled wedding. She listened without interrupting, just nodding occasionally. When I finished, she said she was grateful I'd learned that lesson before meeting her, because it meant I knew what I was looking for in a partner. Then she shared her own story about a boyfriend who'd wanted her to quit volunteering because it took time away from him. She'd ended things because someone who couldn't support her values wasn't worth keeping. We talked for hours about what mattered to us, what we wouldn't compromise on, and what kind of life we wanted to build. Everything aligned in a way that felt easy and right. Rachel sent me a friend request on social media out of nowhere a week later. I stared at it for maybe 5 seconds before declining. Bella noticed and asked about it. I explained that Rachel tried to reconnect occasionally, but I had no interest in reopening that door. What we had was over and should stay over. Bella said she respected that I had clear boundaries and didn't leave things messy or uncertain. She'd dated guys who kept exes around as backup options, and it always caused problems. The fact that I'd made a clean break and stuck to it mattered to her. We moved on to talking about other things, but I felt good about how that conversation went. No drama, no jealousy, just mutual respect and clear communication. This was what a healthy relationship looked like. Justin's wedding happened 3 months later at a local vineyard that his fiancée picked out. The ceremony took place outside under big oak trees with white chairs set up in neat rows. Mom's centerpieces sat on every table at the reception. These beautiful arrangements with wildflowers and candles that she'd spent weeks making. They looked perfect. Way better than anything Rachel would have approved of. Dad wore his best suit and gave a toast during dinner that had everyone laughing about the time Justin and I tried to start a lawn mowing business when we were 12 and accidentally mowed down a neighbor's prize rose bushes. The whole family showed up, all the aunts and uncles and cousins that Rachel had called random people. We danced late into the night, the kind of celebration where everyone actually wants to be there instead of showing up out of obligation. Bella fit right in with my relatives, dancing with my younger cousins and helping my aunts clear plates, even though the venue had staff for that. Several family members pulled me aside throughout the evening to tell me they liked her, that she seemed like good people. My aunt said she hoped Bella stuck around, and I told her I hoped so too. During the reception, Rhett found me near the bar and asked if we could talk outside for a minute. We walked out to the vineyard patio where it was quieter, just the sound of music drifting through the open doors behind us. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot before he finally spoke. He said he was glad I found someone who got what mattered to me, someone who appreciated my family instead of looking down on them. Then he admitted he'd felt guilty about the whole Rachel situation for months after everything fell apart. He'd been the one who introduced us, and he kept wondering if he should have seen the warning signs earlier, or said something about how she treated service workers. Seeing me happy with Bella made him realize that everything worked out the way it should have, that sometimes the worst experiences lead you to the right person. I told him he was a good friend and I never blamed him for what happened with Rachel. How was he supposed to know she'd turn out to be someone completely different after we got engaged? We went back inside and he bought me a beer and that was that. The business started picking up even more over the next few months. I landed a major contract with a property management company that wanted us to handle landscaping for their corporate office park across town. The job was huge, way bigger than anything we'd done before, and it meant I could hire 2 more full-time employees to help with the workload. Justin and I celebrated by taking our whole crew out to dinner at this steakhouse downtown, and I invited Bella to come along. She'd started helping with some of the business side of things, handling invoicing and client communications when I got too busy with actual field work. She was good at it, organized and professional, and she seemed to enjoy being involved in something we were building. During dinner, one of the new guys asked her how she kept track of all the different client accounts, and she explained her system with real enthusiasm. She wasn't just doing me a favor, she actually cared about helping the business succeed. 6 months after I met Bella, something shifted inside me. We were at her apartment one evening, just making dinner together and talking about our days, and I realized I was in love with her. But it felt completely different from what I thought I felt with Rachel. This wasn't exciting uncertainty or surface attraction mixed with hope that things would work out. This was solid and real, built on actually knowing each other and respecting what the other person valued. With Rachel, I'd been in love with the idea of her, the charming pharmaceutical sales rep who seemed successful and put together. With Bella, I loved who she actually was when nobody was watching, how she treated waiters and store clerks, how she talked about her patients and her family. After we ate, we were sitting on her couch and I just told her. I said I loved her, no big build-up or perfect moment, just the truth. She looked at me for a second, then smiled and said she loved me too. She meant it, I could tell. There was no hesitation or surprise, like she'd been feeling the same way and was just waiting for one of us to say it out loud. We started talking seriously about the future after that. Not in a vague someday kind of way, but actual concrete plans about where we wanted to live and what we wanted our lives to look like. Bella wanted to stay in town near both our families, which matched what I wanted. We talked about finances and how we'd handle money if we got married, whether we'd combine everything or keep some separate. She had student loans from college and I had the business loan from when I started the company, and we figured out a plan for paying both off together. These conversations were easy and felt like we were building something as partners. With Rachel, wedding planning had been her telling me what was happening, and me either agreeing or causing a fight. With Bella, we actually discussed things and made decisions together. She cared about my opinion and I cared about hers, and we usually agreed on the important stuff anyway. Summer came around and my extended family planned their annual barbecue at my parents' house. I'd been bringing Bella to Sunday dinners for months, but this was the first time she'd meet everyone all at once, the full chaos of aunts and uncles and cousins all crammed into one backyard. She showed up early to help set up tables and chairs, and within an hour she was deep in conversation with my aunts about their recipes. They were teaching her how to make Mom's potato salad, and she was taking notes on her phone like it actually mattered to her. Later I saw her playing catch with my younger cousins, teaching them how to throw a football properly. She didn't do it for show or because she thought she should, she just genuinely enjoyed being around my family. Uncle Mike came over while I was manning the grill and told me he liked her. He said she seemed down to earth and real, not stuck up or fake. Then he offered to help her understand some tax advantages for small business owners, since she'd mentioned wanting to start her own consulting thing eventually. She thanked him, and they exchanged numbers so they could set up a time to talk about it properly. That evening, after most people had left and we were helping clean up, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. She said Bella reminded her of family, someone who shows up and participates and treats people with kindness, no matter what job they have or how much money they make. Mom said that's the kind of person who builds a good life, not someone who's always looking for the next impressive thing to show off to their friends. She didn't mention Rachel by name, but I knew what she meant. Bella was the opposite of everything Rachel had been. She valued the same things my family valued, and she didn't see helping with dishes or playing with kids as beneath her. Mom hugged me and said she was happy I found someone who fit, and I told her I was happy too. A year after the canceled wedding with Rachel, I decided to propose to Bella. I thought about doing something elaborate or surprising, but that didn't feel right for us. Instead, I waited until Sunday dinner at my parents' house with the whole family there. After we finished eating and everyone was sitting around talking, I just got down on one knee right there in the living room where I grew up. I didn't have a big speech prepared, I just asked her to be my partner in life, to build something real with me. Bella started crying immediately, happy tears running down her face, and she said yes. My whole family erupted in cheers and Mom started crying too. Dad shook my hand and hugged Bella, and my aunts were already talking about engagement parties and wedding dates. It wasn't fancy or elaborate, but it was perfect because it was real and surrounded by people who actually cared about us. Bella's family came to town 2 weeks later to celebrate the engagement. We hosted a big dinner at my parents' house so both families could meet properly. Her parents were teachers, her dad taught history at a high school, and her mom taught elementary school. They reminded me so much of my own parents, just regular hardworking people who raised their kids with solid values and didn't care about impressing anyone. Her dad and my dad hit it off immediately, talking about home repair projects and swapping stories about fixing things that probably should have been replaced years ago. Our mom started planning engagement party details within the first hour, comparing ideas for decorations and food. Bella's younger sister got along great with my cousins, and by the end of the night, both families were mixed together at the table, like they'd known each other for years. This was what family was supposed to feel like, people coming together because they genuinely liked each other, not because they had to pretend for appearances. We started planning the wedding right away, and it was actually fun instead of stressful. We picked a nice local venue, nothing crazy expensive, but nice enough that it felt special. We decided on a family-style dinner instead of a plated meal, because that felt more like us, more casual and comfortable. Mom offered to make centerpieces, and Bella got excited about it, asking to help so she could learn how to make them. Our guest list was full of people we actually loved and wanted there, no politics about who had to be invited to avoid offending someone. Bella insisted on including everyone who mattered to us, all my aunts and uncles and cousins, all her relatives and friends. The planning process felt like we were building something together, instead of one person dictating everything to the other. We agreed on what was important, celebrating with the people we cared about, and starting our marriage in a way that reflected who we actually were. No country clubs, no trying to impress anyone, just a real wedding for a real relationship. 3 months before the wedding to Bella, I stopped at a coffee shop downtown to grab something before a client meeting. I was waiting for my order when I heard someone say my name. I turned and there was Rachel standing by the sugar station, looking different somehow. She seemed smaller, less polished than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the styled waves she used to spend an hour on. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, nothing designer. She walked over slowly, like she wasn't sure if I'd talk to her. I nodded and she asked if we could sit for a minute. I had 20 minutes before my meeting, so I said okay. We sat at a corner table and she noticed the ring on my finger immediately. She asked if I was happy, and I told her honestly that I was. Really happy. She nodded and stared at her coffee cup for a long moment. Then she said she was seeing a therapist now, working through some things about why she treated people the way she did. She said she was starting to understand that she pushed away the people who actually cared about her because she was so focused on what looked good instead of what was real. I listened but didn't say much. She asked about my family and I told her they were doing great. She said she owed them an apology but understood if they didn't want to hear from her. I didn't disagree. We sat there for another minute in awkward silence before I said I needed to get going. She stood up and wished me well and I could tell she meant it. I said I hoped things worked out for her and left. I didn't offer my number or suggest staying in touch. That chapter was closed. Walking to my truck after the meeting, I realized that conversation gave me something I didn't know I needed. Closure. Real closure, not the angry kind where you're still holding on to hurt. I wasn't mad at Rachel anymore. I was just grateful. Grateful that everything fell apart when it did, before we got married and made things even more complicated. Some people have to learn the hard way about what matters in life. Maybe Rachel would figure it out eventually with her therapist's help. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my job to teach her or fix her or wait around to see if she changed. My job was to build a good life with someone who already understood what mattered. That's what I was doing with Bella. The next weekend, my whole family gathered at my parents' house for a cookout. Justin found me by the grill helping Dad with burgers and pulled me aside. He had this big grin on his face. He asked if I'd be his best man for a vow renewal ceremony he was planning for his first anniversary. I laughed and said he was already married. What did he need a best man for? He said his wife wanted to do a big celebration with both families since their actual wedding had been small and rushed because of work schedules. I told him I'd be honored. Then I joked that at least this time I knew the bride actually liked the family. His wife was standing nearby and heard me. She walked over laughing and said she loved our loud, chaotic family gatherings and wouldn't change a single thing about them. She hugged me and said she was glad I found someone like Bella who felt the same way. Justin clapped me on the shoulder and we went back to the grill. Dad handed me the spatula and told me the burgers were ready to flip. 2 months before the wedding, Bella and I closed on a house in the same neighborhood where I grew up. It was a 3-bedroom ranch that needed work, but the bones were solid and the price was right. The kitchen cabinets were from the 80s and the bathroom tile was cracked. The back deck was rotting and the fence needed replacing. But it had a big yard and mature trees and it felt like home the first time we walked through it. We moved our stuff in on a Saturday, and Dad showed up an hour later with his truck full of tools. He walked through the house making notes about what needed fixing first. By noon, 3 of my uncles had arrived with their own tools and materials. They measured the kitchen for new cabinets while Dad and I started ripping out the old bathroom tile. Bella was thrilled. She kept saying she couldn't believe how much help we were getting. I told her this was just how our family worked. We took care of each other. She spent the afternoon painting the bedroom while Mom showed her the right technique for cutting in around the trim. When we ordered pizza for dinner, 12 people crowded into our new living room, sitting on the floor and eating off paper plates. Bella looked around at everyone and squeezed my hand. She whispered that she'd never felt more at home anywhere. The renovations took over our weekends for the next month. Bella learned to paint trim from Mom, who was patient and encouraging even when Bella messed up and got paint on the hardwood. She helped Dad install new light fixtures in the hallway, holding the fixtures steady while he wired them in. Every Saturday, she brought lunch for whoever was working on the house, and sandwiches and chips and cookies she'd baked the night before. My aunts taught her their recipes, and she took notes on her phone. One Sunday afternoon, while we were taking a break on the back deck, she told me she never had this growing up. Her parents were great, but they lived far from extended family. She never experienced this kind of group effort where everyone pitched in to help. She said it made her feel like she belonged to something bigger than just herself, like she was part of a real team. I pulled her close and told her she was family now. She had been from the moment she said yes. A month before the wedding, everything came together smoothly. The venue confirmed all the details. The caterer sent the final menu. The florist had pictures of the arrangements ready. Our families were excited and helpful without being pushy or demanding. There was no drama, no stress, no fighting over stupid details. Bella and I were on the same page about everything because we'd talked through it all together. We treated the vendors with respect, and they went out of their way to help us. The photographer offered to stay an extra hour at no charge because she said we were the nicest couple she'd worked with all year. The DJ asked what songs mattered to our families and made sure to include them. This was what wedding planning should feel like. Two people and their families genuinely caring about each other and celebrating something real. Not trying to impress anyone or prove anything, just building the start of a life together with the people who mattered most. My bachelor party was a camping trip with Justin, Rhett, and 3 other close friends. We drove 2 hours north to a state park and set up tents by a lake. No strippers, no bars, no getting drunk and stupid, just guys who'd known each other for years sitting around a campfire talking about life. We fished during the day and cooked what we caught over the fire. At night, we talked about marriage and family and what really mattered. Rhett told me he'd never seen me this happy or settled. He said Bella brought out the best in me. Justin agreed and said watching me with Bella reminded him why he married his wife. They were building something real together, just like Bella and I were. One of my other friends asked if I was nervous about getting married. I said no. I was excited, ready. This felt right in a way nothing with Rachel ever had. I fell asleep that night in my tent listening to the lake water and feeling incredibly lucky. Bella's bachelorette party was a spa day with her sisters and mom, followed by dinner at my parents' house with my mom and aunts. They got massages and facials and their nails done. Then they came over and Mom had prepared a huge spread of food, homemade lasagna and salad and garlic bread. My aunts brought desserts. The women sat around the dining room table for hours talking and laughing. Bella told me later that having our moms become friends meant everything to her. She was excited to officially join our family. She said the fact that she saw marriage as joining families instead of just marrying me showed her we had the same values. That's what made her certain we'd work. Not because everything would be perfect, but because we understood what mattered, and we'd face it together. The wedding day arrived with clear blue skies and warm sunshine. Everyone we loved was there. My parents sat in the front row where they belonged. Bella's family filled the other side. Our friends and extended family packed the rest of the seats. When Bella walked down the aisle, she was crying happy tears, and so was I. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. We wrote our own vows and promised to build a life based on love and respect and family. Mom cried during the whole thing. Dad's eyes were wet too, though he tried to hide it. After we were pronounced married, everyone cheered and it felt like the start of something amazing. The reception was everything we wanted. Good food, great music, and people we loved celebrating with us. Dad gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. He talked about watching me grow up and how proud he was of the man I'd become. He said Bella was exactly the right person for me, and he was grateful to have her as a daughter. We danced with our families late into the night. This was what I was supposed to have all along. Our honeymoon was a road trip through national parks. Just the two of us with a tent and hiking boots and no schedule. We drove through mountains and deserts. We hiked trails and watched sunsets. We camped under stars and talked about our future. Bella said she wanted kids someday. She hoped they'd grow up with the same strong family bonds I had. I told her they would because we were going to build that kind of family together. The kind where people showed up for each other. Where love meant action, not just words. Where family came first and everyone belonged. I meant it with everything in me. When we got back from the honeymoon, we threw a barbecue at our house to thank everyone who helped with the renovations and wedding. The backyard was packed with family and friends by noon. Dad was manning the grill with 2 of my uncles, flipping burgers and arguing about the best way to cook ribs. Mom and Bella's mom were setting out side dishes on folding tables we'd borrowed from the church. Justin brought his whole crew from the landscaping business, and they were impressed with the deck we'd built. Bella moved through the crowd with a pitcher of lemonade, stopping to chat with everyone and making sure plates stayed full. She laughed at my cousin's terrible jokes and listened to my aunt's long story about her garden. Watching her fit so naturally into my family, I knew I'd made the right choice in every way that mattered. This was what a partnership looked like when both people valued the same things. 6 months into marriage, we'd settled into a pattern that felt easy and right. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were non-negotiable, and Bella never complained about going. She'd help Mom in the kitchen while Dad and I watched whatever game was on. Once a month, we hosted her family at our place, and my parents always came too, because the families had genuinely become friends. We made decisions together about everything from what color to paint the bathroom to whether we should expand the business. The contrast with how things were with Rachel hit me sometimes when I least expected it, like when Bella asked my opinion about her work schedule, or when she suggested inviting my cousins over for dinner just because. Rachel would have called that a waste of time. Bella called it building the life we wanted. A year after the wedding, Bella told me she was pregnant at Sunday dinner. We'd planned to tell our families together, so we waited until everyone was sitting around the table with full plates. She looked at me and squeezed my hand, and I announced that we had news. The room went silent for about 2 seconds before Mom started crying, and Dad jumped up to hug us both. Bella's parents were hugging each other and wiping their eyes. My aunts were already planning baby showers and arguing about who got to host. Justin clapped me on the back so hard I nearly choked on my water. The celebration lasted hours with everyone talking over each other about names and nurseries and whose eyes the baby would have. Our kid would grow up surrounded by this kind of love and acceptance, which was the greatest gift we could give. Looking back on everything that happened with Rachel, I'm grateful the wedding fell apart when it did. That disaster led me to Bella, taught me to trust my gut about people's character, and proved that family and basic human decency matter more than status or money. My life now is everything I wanted: a partner who respects my family, a business that's growing, a baby on the way, the knowledge that I chose the right path. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, and I wouldn't change a thing.